Hi, everybody, and welcome. We are going to start in just a couple minutes. I just want to give a few more people an opportunity to join. So if we could just hold for about another minute and then we'll start. Thank you. All right, I'm going to fire it up here. We got a bunch of people on. Thank you, everybody, for joining our exclusive security briefing. We definitely appreciate your time and attention. I'm Steve Banda. I'm the Director of Partner Marketing at Lookout, and I'll be serving as the host for these series as we go forward. Before we begin, I just want to kind of make a couple comments about these briefings. These are for partners, right? So whether you're an existing partner or you're looking at Lookout to become a partner, you're in the right place. And we're holding these, as I said, monthly, and it's going to be always at the same time on the third Thursday of the month at this time. So you can really, have a reliable time to show up. And really the goal of these is to be able to surface information for you so that you can have some really rich conversations with your customers, with your prospects. And the insights that we're bringing are coming directly from our threat intelligence team. So some really good stuff here. Excited today about our topic, and I want to kind of get right to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Jim Coyle to start unmasking Pegasus for us. Jim?
Appreciate that. So, again, just kind of appreciate everyone's time. And so we've been kind of doing some digging lately as Pegasus has really kind of started to rear its ugly head back on the global stage again. And so we felt like we should probably revisit this topic, talk a little bit about it. There's been a lot of recent attacks. There's been a lot of research lately that's kind of gone into really kind of taking apart the history of Pegasus, and that's kind of what we're going to go through today. So first, let's just take a step back. So in conjunction with Citizen Lab, Lookout had helped identify Pegasus and specifically the chain of exploits that were involved, where really upon utilizing apologize, can't talk this morning. Utilizing these exploits, we're able to get Pegasus initially, and we ended up calling them Trident. Now, there was a human rights activist, his name was Ahmed Mansour, who was based in the UAE, and he had received text messages August 10th and 11th back in, I want to say it was about 2011, 2012 timeframe. But ultimately promising secrets about detainees that were being tortured in UAE jails, and he just needed to click on a link in order to get more information. So he immediately reached out to Citizen Lab and their researchers and sent them the text messages that he had received. And Mansour worked with Citizen Lab in the past after being targeted with quote unquote lawful intercept malware back in 2011, which originally was FinFisher back then. And then again in 2012 with Hacking Team spyware. And so he was pretty, comfortable with working with Citizen Lab and their researchers. And Citizen Lab had identified the links in the text messages were ultimately NSO exploit infrastructure, and then collaborated with Lookout, where we had identified the chain of zero-day exploit code. Again, that's what we call Trident. And after hooking up a stock iPhone 5 and then going to the link that was sent in the text messages to Mansour's iPhone, we observed that Safari went to the site and then just closed out. But the researchers noticed that it downloaded a few files. The exploit would then following the payload, and that payload, which turned out to be Pegasus. And there's two delivery methods at the time of Pegasus. And this is according to the Hacking Team materials, which were provided to WikiLeaks after a 2015 breach. So The first is a one-click delivery method, which utilized the Trident exploit chain, which is ultimately what Mansoor got served with. The reason why it's called one-click is because you still actually have to click a link to go to the infrastructure that was weaponized. The second is what's being utilized today, which is a zero-click delivery method, meaning the end user doesn't actually have to do anything. They don't have to click on anything in order to become infected. Now, the reports both by Lookout and Citizen Lab were released after Apple had patched the exploits as part of working together and making sure that we're able to catch not just Pegasus in the wild, but also being able to ensure that the patch is going to fix the initial issue. Now, again, when we talk about kind of the history of Pegasus, and we go back to that first initial exploit utilizing Trident, a user had to click on the link, which was ultimately developed over time to utilize various software exploits to not need any interaction from the user, going into that zero-click method that I was referencing. And the link still needed to get to the device in some fashion. Initially, this was an SMS message, but then was developed to utilize multiple forms of messaging, such as SMS, email. It could have come from social media, third-party messaging apps like Signal or WhatsApp, various gaming apps, or even dating apps. And one thing to mention about these links is that they were set up to look like government websites. There was an instance where it was the Red Cross, various news and TV media websites. There was an instance of passport renewal services, but it's also able and very capable to do redirects to other websites. And so the way that works is, if a user goes to the infrastructure is going to look and see, is Pegasus already installed? And if so, great, we can go ahead and redirect to a legitimate website. Maybe it's Google, maybe it's to the legitimate passport renewal service, as opposed to reinfecting the phone. Now, the software is specifically designed to turn your phone into a portable spy. It could collect and exfiltrate data from text messages, calls, emails, blogs, voicemails, phones, apps, including the encrypted apps like Signal and WhatsApp, and ultimately information that you may have thought that you had deleted. And it also allows functionalities such as geolocation tracking, turning your phone into a hot mic, and turning on your camera, making it a portable video camera. And as Pegasus was developed over time, so did its marketing. An identical product known as Phantom was being sold in the United States by a company called Westbridge, which ultimately is NSO's US-based group. And during its time of development, the exploits that were used to deliver Pegasus has also changed as researchers have helped close the vulnerabilities with the vendors whose code was being exploited. Just as the example I gave earlier, when Citizen Lab, Lookout, and Apple basically were working together to patch Trident. One of these exploits was utilizing WhatsApp software, in which a call to a victim was all it took in order to deliver the exploit. Again, the victim really didn't even have to answer. As long as that call took place, they could be infected with Pegasus. Now, in January of this year, Frontline had put together a really great documentary as part of what's called the Pegasus Project. It was a two-part series that got launched in January. The stories are plenty. They talked a lot about very specific individuals that Pegasus basically was being utilized to target against journalists, activists, dissidents, and political figures, including the friends and family of those targets as well. And the Pegasus Project was really this massive undertaking. It really kind of entailed over 17 journalists. You had organizations such as Washington Post, The Guardian, Lamont, The Wire, and I mean there's quite a bit. And ultimately, how the Pegasus Project came to be was there was a list that was obtained by this organization that contained 50,000 phone numbers. And this was Forbidden Stories who had acquired this phone list. And the phone list ultimately was combined, had both victims as well as the administrators of Pegasus. And when you take a look at some of those phone numbers, over 15,000 of them has been matched to Mexico, and over 1,000 to Azerbaijan, which are just some of the things that we're going about to talk about here. So first, let's talk about Mexico City. So this is kind of the start of Pegasus. I think we're all pretty much in sales, and some of this is, will probably resonate from a sales story perspective. But imagine being with a customer, negotiations are going really well, and suddenly arguments on the customer side are taking place, going back and forth about price and how the product is going to be delivered. Now, if you can imagine, what would happen if just one of those people that were arguing happened to be the general for the military of this particular customer, and ultimately stood up and said, you know what, we're not progressing here. We'll continue at a later time, and to continue these negotiations, we're gonna arrange transportation for you at your hotel. Now, again, this was kind of the start of Pegasus becoming, in the development world, known as generally availability, right? So the Israeli sales team, which was working for NSO, was then picked up by military escort and was taken to a strip club in Mexico City, where ultimately, over shots of tequila and dancers, they were able to conduct the terms of sale. And what started out as a tool to ultimately squash those speaking up against the state was also being utilized to track down leaders of drug cartels, human rights defenders, and this is all in spite of the Mexican government saying that they had stopped using the tool. Now, again, Pegasus project had found, the 50,000 phone numbers, where 15,000 of them had belonged to Mexico, and there was a lot of activity as recent as the second half of 2022. And when we take a look at it from a historical perspective, so you had President Calderon and his Secretary of Defense, that they were looking in a way to break into BlackBerry phones, which was specifically being utilized by the drug cartels. And this is why Pegasus was of interest to them. They called it their kingpin strategy for confronting organized crime. And ultimately, the Mexican military had purchased Pegasus, and the unit that was chosen to run the program was a secret arm of the Army called the Military Intelligence Center. Now, fast forward to the next administration, and so now we've got President Peña Nieto, who ultimately took office in 2012. And two more agencies had acquired Pegasus during that presidential office. And those two agencies were the Attorney General's Office and CISEN, which ultimately is the National Intelligence Center for Mexico. And during the presidency, journalists, human rights activists, and political opponents were spied on, which ultimately became a massive scandal that hit the global news market. Now, as a result, there was a gentleman by the name of Lopez Obrador who ultimately ended up taking over as president because of the scandal. And he was not really happy with how things were organized within the government, and so there was a restructuring. And ultimately, only the military at that point was utilizing Pegasus. And Mexican law states that, hey, in order to spy on private communications, you need to have, a judge's approval, right? You need to have an order. And the military, in multiple occasions, had stated that they never made a request to do that. Now, if we fast forward to today, specifically May 2023, there was a news story that broke through the New York Times that the Undersecretary for Human Rights in Mexico's government ministry and two people in his office had been infected with Pegasus. Now, the Undersecretary and President Obrador were very close allies. And in fact, the president had ultimately downplayed it when the undersecretary questioned about it, and basically said that, hey, I don't believe my army was at fault, and they'll look into it. Now, there was a huge news story that broke about right before Obrador had taken the office of the president, where there were this mysterious disappearance of 43 students that were going to college. This became Obrador's campaign, where the undersecretary was ultimately tasked, if he became president, to find out exactly what happened and let the public know exactly who was involved, how did these people just mysteriously disappear, and ultimately they became very, very close allies through this investigation. Now, what's kind of interesting is that the president ultimately started to become highly reliant on the military for a number of issues. Now, this also included things like building airports. It was really important to build like a train for tourism, as well as dealing with drug trafficking. Everything had to be run through the military. And again, when you look at, there was several breaches of Mexican government offices, and when you take a look through the documents, it really kind of showcased that the military was utilizing Pegasus against journalists, against other officials within the Mexican government, and human rights defenders, as well as those who are investigating the government. And so, the New York Times article had posed a question of the scary thought of what happens if the Mexican military was running on its own and was no longer responsible to the office of the president or to the people. So next I want to talk a little bit about Jamal Khashoggi. Again, this was pretty big in the news, or I should say this gentleman was pretty big in the news for a long time. He was a dissident in Saudi Arabia, and was a journalist for the Washington Post, the Middle East Eye. He was also the general manager and editor-in-chief of Al Arab News, and ultimately was assassinated at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, where he and his fiancee were basically there to file papers for marriage. And Khashoggi had written articles where he was extremely critical over the rule of King Salman, who is the crown prince. And ultimately, most of what he was writing about was around, the ability of free expression, equal rights in the Arab world, as well as being against the Saudi war on Yemen. Now, while the Saudi Arabian government, had denied Khashoggi's death initially, the stories changed over time. Turkey had released a statement that he was ultimately strangled and had a recording of his last words. And Turkey had outlined ultimately the gruesome manner of Khashoggi's assassination, outlining a Saudi hit squad in which they had indicted 20 individuals based on entry and exits into the country from the airport, being at the Saudi consulate at the specific time, date and time of Khashoggi's death, as well as analysis of phone records between those 20 individuals. Now, the U.S., or I should say in the U.S., the Central Intelligence Agency had concluded with moderate to high confidence that the order had come from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which then created these geopolitical tensions. And the Senate unanimously had ultimately passed a resolution that held the Crown Prince responsible for the assassination of Khashoggi in a 56-41 vote, which ultimately ended military aid for the Saudi war in Yemen. Now, not only was Khashoggi's phone infected with Pegasus, but his fiancee's phone was also confirmed to have Pegasus. And now he also had a secret wife who happened to be hiding, waiting for her political asylum case. And that secret wife was working for Emirates Airlines, and during a trip, she ended up being detained in the UAE, where Pegasus ended up being manually loaded onto her phone while she was being interrogated over a 17-hour period. Now, what was really interesting in this manual loading of Pegasus The news story that had broke ultimately ended up talking a lot about how there was some fumbling in the installation. There were some typos that were entered into the web address in order to install Pegasus. And it seemed like maybe this was the first time that these individuals were utilizing the installation or this version of installation to get Pegasus on the phone. So next, I want to kind of talk about what's been going on over the last couple of years between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, what really makes this this kind of story here really interesting is the fact that this is the first time that Pegasus is being utilized in a conflict zone or in a war zone, right? Now, right around, I want to say it was end of 2021, Apple had started doing some detection capability through an alliance that they have with a bunch of vendors, Lookout included, where if they detect nation state targeting of a user, that they can actually send out a notification to those users through text message, through a pop-up on the phone, and through email. And so Apple users ultimately started getting notifications that they may have been targeted with state-sponsored spyware in November of 2021. And a lot of those users ended up contacting a company called CyberHub AM, as well as Access Now, in order to see if the messages that they had received from Apple were legitimate, right? They weren't some sort of spear phishing. Now, one of the most heavily attacked individuals was a lady by the name of, forgive me, I may murder this last name here, but Anna Naglin, who was the former spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Armenia. Now, there were a lot of other people who were targeted, and those individuals included members of the media, journalists, activists. There was a United Nations official, as well as the former human rights defender of the Republic of Armenia. Now, the initial start of this was the Nagorno-Karabakh War, which ultimately was a territorial dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan back in 2020. This ended in a ceasefire where peace was brokered. Russia came in. They had installed peacekeepers, in order to make sure that the war zone, got quieted down. And ultimately, another conflict had kicked off in the Karabakh region, with ultimately Azerbaijan had started an offensive back in May of 2021. Now, there were several clashes, in July and again in November of 2021. And this is really where the majority of Pegasus victims were infected. There were 30 successful infections. Now, there was a second round of Pegasus targeting, which basically came about the escalations of fighting in September of 2022, as well as October of 22. There were also some peace talks, and lastly, there was a blockade of the Latin corridor, which began on December 12th, which also had a spike in Pegasus activity as well. What I found kind of interesting, so the parent company, Facebook, Meta, they did a report back in 2021. This report was called the Threat Report on Surveillance for Hire Industry. So it's believed in this report that Armenia is both using and being targeted by Cytox's Predator spyware. This is basically the competition for Pegasus. Predator is just another spyware capability that they want to go after the NSO's group business. And due to the Pegasus project, Azerbaijan was found to be using Pegasus as there were over 1,000 phone numbers that were linked to individuals that were being targeted through utilizing Pegasus. Now, there was some additional work where Citizen Lab had found Pegasus one-click infrastructure, which was ultimately stood up to look like Azerbaijan political websites. And when victims were sent these SMS messages linked to these websites, obviously they were, ended up being infected. Now, kind of coming closer and closer to the future here, back in December of 2021, roughly, there were details still are kind of fuzzy, but ultimately there were somewhere between 9 and 11 U.S. State Department employees, which were found to have Pegasus on their phones. And it really wasn't made clear, but it appeared that these employees happened to be stationed in Uganda or had Ugandese phones, and that these individuals were basically focused on, all matters regarding the country. Details are kind of fuzzy because obviously, State Department doesn't want to put out too much information. But NSO did make a public statement that Pegasus will not work on phones that have a US country code by design. I thought this was really, really interesting. Now, Reuters did report that the US State Department employees were utilizing phone numbers. Basically, these were foreign telephone numbers. Again, there were telephone numbers in Uganda. So, there's an assumption that NSO is not lying about the fact that Pegasus will not work within the US. And ultimately, that would mean that Pegasus could be loaded onto those Ugandan phone lines. Now, the other group that was caught up in this Uganda targeting were also political figures. And there was a tweet by Norbert Mao, who's the president of the Ugandan Democratic Party, which also included a photo from Apple notifying him that ultimately his phone had been targeted by threats. And again, this is the same time that Apple had announced that it's going to start warning users of those state-sponsored attacks. So whether it was, the Ugandan government looking for more information, or from even from like a political party perspective, was the opposition utilizing? This is kind of what's being called into question currently. Excuse me. Now, even just recently, there were 50 US officials had their phones targeted, and every news outlet here in the US basically was claiming that it was invasive commercial spyware. Now, remember what I said earlier on this last slide, where it's been said that Pegasus won't work on US phones by design. Well, while nobody's coming out and claiming that this was specifically Pegasus, which I do kind of find a little odd. I didn't see a single news article. If you go and talk to these individuals, they're not coughing up any answers as well. But they all agree on one thing, that it was nation state spyware that infected these phones. Now, President Biden had just signed the executive order, which ultimately placed restrictions on US agencies buying decisions of digital spy tools, right? So this is where ultimately the United States cannot openly purchase Pegasus or other spyware, type malware. And so almost to the date, a year prior, the Department of Commerce had placed the NSO group on what's known as the entity list. This is basically a deny list for doing business within the US. If you're on this list, the US will not do any purchasing, will not broker deals with anyone on that entity list. And NSO Group is seeing the US as a massive market due to the intelligence collection and agencies that exist there. So this is a pretty huge hit to NSO's possible pipeline in business. So due to the NSO Group's business model of selling to organizations and governments that really don't have a good standing when it comes to human rights, it's ultimately the fact that the US is signaling that human rights must come as a priority. And the executive order also outlined what they deem as acceptable use when it comes to these digital spy tools. And while Pegasus isn't the only spyware on the block, it is the only one that features a zero-click activation, again, meaning no user interaction. But there are plenty of threats that are out there, as our adversaries, both nation state and criminal, are definitely taking the rise of a mobile-first vector approach. And if anybody was looking at some lookout material. You may have noticed an APT 41 report that we just announced, where we have tied some new malware around APT1's ability to come in and start utilizing that mobile first approach. Now, again, since 2016, Pegasus isn't the only one on the block. Since 2016, we've really kind of detected over 1,200 families of malware, just from a mobile perspective, and that all these various different pieces of malware run anywhere between credential phishing, extortion campaigns, banking trojans, surveillanceware, root capabilities like Pegasus. And then, of course, you have Pegasus's remote jailbreak capability as well. And this is typically where MDMs really kind of fail the call on protecting devices. These remote capabilities, they're just not able to detect. It's not how they're designed. And we've seen a steady rise in encounter rates, meaning a device has had an attempted phishing attempt, app, device, operating system, or some sort of network-related threat. And while phishing still remains king, and we see well over 1,000 new phishing kits each week, obviously phishing can lead to malware, surveillanceware, or future attacks. Let's take a look at Pegasus as the prime example. All they need to do is send a link over to a user, and the user doesn't even have to do anything. It's just the ability to send, the link that makes all the difference. Now, the rise in encounter rates, again, this is data under Lookout's purview, also matches with the increase of global reporting in regards to the mobile first attack vector. Attacks, whether it's, nation state APT groups, nation state affiliates, state sponsored groups, APT 41, great example, or even cybercrime groups, right? Where various journalists, security researchers, and IR firms are all reporting on. And much like desktop computers, mobile devices need securing, and customers need to include mobile devices in their patch management process, in their hardening capabilities, in their anti-malware capabilities. So, all said and done, because it is summertime, I did kind of want to give a couple of tips just from a travel perspective. When I first initially did this presentation for one of my federal customers, this was actually pretty much a highly requested topic. And it's a personal list. There's nothing really official, right? This is just purely based on my traveling globally as a diplomat, as a security practitioner, as well as being on the front lines of cyber for over the last decade. So I know it's common sense, but always guard your device, never let it out of your sight. You always want to minimize the possibility of someone else accessing the device as much as possible. And if we look at Khashoggi's secret wife, when she was detained and her phone was taken, right, the security team loaded Pegasus. Now, while that may, being detained might be able to be, hard to prevent, you can do something as simple as just don't leave it in your hotel room. There are very many counterintelligence groups which have pre-planned hotel rooms where guests are basically invited or given upgrades, where these counterintelligence teams have already kind of pre-designed rooms, and leaving your device there unguarded ultimately gives them easy access. You want to disable things like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, AirDrop, iMessage, FaceTime, location data, any sort of remote payment systems, and just a quick note on location. I know that there's, what's really interesting, there's some security vendors that are showcasing grabbing location data as a positive. In order to prevent threats, you shouldn't need location, turned on, right? If the phone ended up being rooted or jailbroken, right, an attacker can simply turn that on or off. And not all WARE has that capability, but having it off can decrease your risk profile. I always look at it like this. Would I tell the GRU or the FSB that I'm meeting, a pro-democratic Russian national and give them my location information, right? Absolutely not. So just from a security perspective, turning off location is positive. Always make sure you've got a lock screen set up whether it's a PIN, password, or swipe. Although swipe, depending, on your screen and how often you clean it, it could be pretty quickly determined what that swipe pattern is. And don't use face scans. That's easily bypassed, whether you're awake, conscious, or not. Only use your charger. Don't use someone else's, or don't use a built-in charger that can be found at hotels or airports or coffee shops, trains, or literally anywhere else. Physical access to a device can be pretty potentially harmful, especially if you're not able to verify its source. And especially if you're ever traveling in countries that allow quote unquote lawful intercept, just be careful there. Right? They could load malware, they could shock your phone, fry the electronics. It could be a random charger, but again, me personally, I just prefer to reduce my risk. Always could do a backup of your phone before a trip. If something does go wrong, you can do a restore from your backup. You want to make sure that you're using a VPN while you're traveling. Do your due diligence though on VPN providers. Free is generally not a good thing unless it's from a reputable provider. There's a lot of VPN companies that are shell companies for Chinese intelligence agencies. There's been several reports about that over the years. My previous employer had also done some pretty deep digging on that. And just like a computer, for patch management, right? Always keeping your phone up to date, your apps, right? Making sure that you've got the latest security patches for known vulnerabilities. And the other thing is to reboot your phone daily. Not all malware can actually survive a reboot of a mobile device. I find this kind of interesting because typically with the malware, you want to make sure that you're going to be sticky, right? But for whatever reason, with ARM technology, it's a little bit more difficult to make sure that you are installed and very sticky. And again, I know that it kind of seems like common sense, but attackers are really getting good. Always double check a link. If it looks suspicious, just reduce your risk. Don't click it. When it comes to QR codes, don't scan them. Especially in a post-pandemic world, right? QR code has basically been utilized as a way to, get hotel rewards. It's a way to go to a restaurant and look at the menu. But attackers know this too. And so they are now starting to just leave out laminated pieces of paper with QR codes that are actually malicious. You always want to make sure that whatever you're scanning is legitimate. It could be malware, or it could be a great way to get a scotch. Again, I just tend to reduce my risk. But in a little shameless plug here, but always make sure to have Lookout on your phone, right? We've done the research in over 200 million apps. We're constantly in front of the latest vulnerabilities for both applications as well as the mobile operating systems. We're a leader in mobile security for a reason. And so, you just want to make sure that you're protected while, you're out there and traveling. So with that, that's all I've got for you, Steve. I think I'm going to toss this back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jim, and thank you everybody for hanging in there. I know we went a few minutes later, but there's a lot of really good, rich information. So Jim, as always, thank you for sharing. I just have 2 slides. I want to just introduce a new solution that we will be releasing to you shortly. It's called Lookout Partner Boost. So the idea is to really just help you generate some leads easily. Right, so it's a prospecting tool. How it'll work is we will provide a landing page for you within the Partner Hub. You'll go in, you'll access your own version of that landing page. You'll put your logo on there, and then you set up an email list of prospects, and you hit send. This pushes this out to your prospects via email or also via social. And then they would basically fill out submit a form to download the asset, or perhaps, we want to send a recording of even this webinar. This is an application for this. And then what happens is you get the leads right back into Partner Hub, and then you can follow up accordingly. And then Jim, there's just one other slide, and then we're on our way. Tune in for the next security briefing. So as I mentioned, we will be holding these on the 3rd Thursday of every month. Same time, same place. The registration link for this one is coming, and this is going to drill into the APT 41 group that we saw. We recently had 2 Android surveillanceware discoveries that we want to surface for you guys and give you some insight. So again, thanks a lot. Really appreciate your time and look forward to you joining again in the future. Take care.